I'm Donna Dingle from the Office of Disability Services. I know a couple of people are walking in, but I'm going to go ahead and start. Okay, the first important thing, and I know I say it every time I meet with you, but it is the reason we accommodate our students, besides a sense of fairness and all of those other things, is because of the laws. And these are the laws that govern discriminatory behavior against people with disabilities. So when we talk about an accommodation letter as a legal document, these are the laws that we're referring to. Okay, so our office now has about 550 students. If you've talked to me before, we go up about 100 each year. So it's getting very busy, so more and more of you will have students registered with me in your classes. Our office does quite a bit of support for the students. So I meet with all of the new incoming students. We receive documentation and determine appropriate accommodations. We have a mentor or academic coach who meets with the students once a week, especially the first-year students. We want to work on transition skills, time management, organization, things like that. What we've discovered is the students who meet with our mentor actually have a higher GPA than those who should meet with the mentor and choose not to. Last year when we ran the records, we saw the students using our mentor. Freshman students had an average GPA of 3.2. Those who did not use the mentor had an average GPA of 2.2, which is a really big difference. We don't tutor, by the way. We are just providing other supports. Oops, sorry. We have assistive technology training for some of the students. Nowadays, a lot of accommodations can be done through technology. There's a lot of free software out there that students can download. No longer do they have to run to the library to use the text reading software. They can now have it on their computer, and some of them have it on their phones. So we teach them that, and we are using a lot more technology for them because they can take that technology with them when they go into internships or externships, when they go into the field. This way they become more independent. We run an adaptive testing room. I would say center, but it's really a room. So for students who need to test outside of the classroom for distraction reasons, for students who need to test with special equipment that is not in the classroom, we will provide that in our testing room. We provide training to different groups on campus, a lot of the student groups, the faculty, and part of my job is to keep in touch with all of the departments on campus to make sure that every aspect of the university is accessible to all people. Okay, so we don't just allow students to walk in and say, I want extra time on my tests, I want extra time for my homework. It doesn't work like that. They have to provide me with documentation of a disability, and then we look at the documentation to see what their limitations are. Where does a disability really affect them? Accommodations are based off that. Very often we do run into problems because K-12 laws are different than higher ed. So incoming freshmen and their parents are used to a very long list of accommodations based around the success of a student, whereas in college we are looking at only access issues. So it makes it a little different. Students will receive a letter signed by me for each teacher. They will give the letter to each teacher, should be the first week of school. The teacher signs a receipt, the receipt comes back to me, and if they need to test with me, I'm just showing you the color. This is the sheet we use, a nice bright yellow sheet that shows that we will be the students requesting to take a test in my office. Okay, students have rights. Students with disabilities have right to equal access to every area on campus, all activities on campus, all classroom materials. So for a blind student who obviously is not going to read a printed page, we need to provide access to those same information in a different form. Students have the right for equal and effective accommodations and information in alternative formats, either through online services, through an interpreter, through alternate text, things like that. Students' responsibility is to provide the documentation to me. If a student walks into you and hands you a note from their psychiatrist and says, I need accommodations, here's my doctor's note, don't take it. Say, please take this to Disability Services. All right, we really, one, don't want this kind of documentation floating around, and two, we have a procedure students must follow. So they provide the documentation. They need to meet the standards. All students must meet behavioral and academic standards. They may take their tests in a different format, but they still have to take the test. They have to pass the test, okay? We run into issues because some of our students are very, very, very good at persuasion. And professors start to feel guilty and feel that they have to give students alternatives. We don't want to do that. I call that over-accommodating. I actually met a senior who had gotten away without taking a written test for 3.5 years and was very annoyed with the one professor insisting he took a written test. So it's really important that we remember students must meet the same standards. And students must provide the letter to the professor. If they don't give you that letter, the official letter of accommodation, they do not get accommodations. Okay, so reasonable accommodations is a word you're going to hear, 2 words you're going to hear a lot, because we don't just accommodate them with whatever they want, we give them something reasonable. Okay, so we're going to give them reasonable accommodations that will lessen the effect of their disability. I always say we're evening the playing field. We don't need to give our students with disabilities an advantage because that's not fair to the other students. Okay, we're just evening the playing field for them. We will not, I will never ask you to change your course requirements. The students need to pass. If passing is 70, the students need to have a 70. Okay, we're not going to ask you as an accommodation to change that. We're not going to ask you to change a core element of a course. We're going to talk about this later because it's becoming more and more of an issue on campus. And we never want to allow students an unfair advantage. One of the biggest ones I see is students who tell teachers they need more time for their test. The accommodation, extra time for testing, means while they're sitting there taking the test, not the week after everyone else, when they've had a chance to talk to people about the questions or had an extra week of studying. So we want to make sure that if your test is scheduled for this Thursday, all students take it on this Thursday, unless your class has an open policy of changing dates. Occasionally, we do deny requests if they're not reasonable, if they're going to alter the fundamental nature of a course, if they are just impossible to administer, or the law says if they're too expensive, but that is such a very high bar that we really don't even discuss that. But anything that is not going to be fair to other students, will give them an unfair advantage, can be denied. Oh, it's not showing. We learned, just say no. I guess it wasn't Nancy Reagan. I'm going to say, please don't just say no, okay? We can't just say no without a conversation. Sometimes a student will come to me with a very ridiculous request, and I won't say no. My head is screaming, no, 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 but I'm saying, I don't know if that's possible. Let me look into it. Let me talk to the professor. And I am going to ask you, because that's what we need to do, and I'm going to discuss. For example, if you're teaching a speech class, public speaking, I would assume public speaking is part of your course requirements. Now, we've had students who request to write papers instead. In my mind, that's an English class, but I don't teach your class. So I'm going to come to you and say, I have a student who doesn't want to give any speeches at all, wants to write a paper. What do you think? Your first initial reaction is going to say, absolutely no, no, no. But don't. Let's talk, and then you're going to say, oh, but my course, here's look at my syllabus, look at my course objectives, and have a conversation, okay? It's very important that we have these conversations and that we make these decisions the right way, okay? And something like that I'm going to go for. If it's something I don't agree with, the law says it's supposed to be several people from the department who determine what's important in a class, what's necessary in a class, not an individual teacher. So one professor may say, I have a 0 absence attendance policy. Okay, that's fine, but what does the rest of the department say? You know, if it's a department policy, it's different than each individual professor. So these are some of the things we need to talk about. Professors also have rights. You have the right to maintain all academic and behavioral standards in your course. You have the right to receive the verification of disability. That's my letter of accommodation. You do not have the right to know what the student's disability is. Some obvious disabilities, others are invisible, and the students are some students will tell you they don't care, and others are very private about it. So a lot of times a teacher will call me and say, what's this disability? And I'll say, I really can't tell you. Okay? The accommodations will be there. Professors have the right to look at the accommodations and then have a discussion with me if you disagree with something. And you should expect students to complete all requirements of the course by the end of the semester. I'm not writing accommodations for incompletes or extensions. Now, with saying that, should an emergency come up in the middle of the semester, I may reach out to you, and there may be sometimes an occasion to request an incomplete or an extension, something like that, but that is not something that I'm going to be requesting on January 22nd. You should also expect students to request, especially testing accommodations, advance notice, not as they sit down to take a test. Or my favorite, the student's taking the test, and when the professor goes to collect it, the student says, oh, I get extra time. The students are told they need to make these requests in advance. Okay, some of the responsibilities of the faculty and staff. Confidentiality, all right? When you're speaking to the student in a classroom about their disability, please don't discuss it when there's people around. Before class, after class, or ask the student to come to your office. If you're discussing a student with your peers, please be aware. Don't use names, or just be aware of who's around, okay? Please, please, please do not over-accommodate. The accommodations that are on the, accommodations on the letter are not just something that we ran, we have a process. We've worked through our process to come up with those. Those are the accommodations they get. Most students are going to say they want others because they had others in high school, okay? But please don't give it to them. A lot of teachers say, oh, he's a nice student, or she's working so hard, or my favorite, I really don't mind. They can have the whole semester to make it up. That's very nice of you. Or they can have unlimited testing time. That's very nice of you, except that you're not proctoring them, and I don't want to be here till Friday. We have some students who, if you say unlimited, will take that literally, and I will be here for 20 hours.
Where do they go for that test then?
We have a room in the library we use.
Oh, okay. They have a test, we get the test to you somehow. They're not in the classroom.
They're not in the, for students, when they give you this, the backside has the instructions, but normally what happens is the student will make an appointment with us, the professor will email the test to us, and the students know where to go, and then we email it back to you or hand deliver it. If you have problems, if you have questions, if you disagree with an accommodation, or you feel that an accommodation isn't working or is inappropriate, please, please, please call me. I take phone calls all the time. You can email me or call, and it's so much easier. Yes?
So do you mind, instead of that, if they take the exam in our department? Does that matter?
To be honest, that's easier for me. Professors are really the first step of accommodation. Most of our students need the extra time. Extra time is mostly 50% extra time, so about an extra half an hour. So students will, a lot of them will just stay in the classroom. They're supposed to check with you first to make sure you're able to stay. That's the easiest way.
How much counseling do you do with students about what you're talking about in terms of the playing field is supposed to be level and they're not supposed to get an advantage over their peers? So we deal at the Psychological Services Center, we do these evaluations. We deal with a lot of people asking for double time.
Right.
And double time is a very infrequent accommodation. In fact, I hardly ever see it because it's not, you're not supposed to use those accommodations to have a step up above your non-disabled, your peers who are disabled. So how much counseling do you do with students who have unrealistic expectations about what they should receive equal that?
Students and parents. I mean, we discuss this at the intake. Then what will happen is I'll send a letter, they'll get the letter, and they'll say, oh, you forgot an accommodation. And we'll have that conversation again. And then they will, again, bring it up every time they don't do as well as they want. Or that. Really what we're talking about, and they don't seem to understand, is I'm talking about what they need, they're talking about what they want. And what they're bringing to professors is what they want. And a lot of the students you're seeing over in psych services are coming from me because I say, I don't have documentation to support this. So they think they can now go to a psychologist and say, I want you to write so that it says I have extra time on all my work. And some are willing and some are not.
So when you
Go ahead.
I had a student whose handwriting was so bad that it was illegible. It wasn't just bad handwriting, it was illegible. The student asked if he
Right.
Say, I let him do that. Was I wrong?
No, to be honest, I don't think so because it's easier for you to read. And there was no advantage to that as long as you made sure he was on a Word document, not on the internet. Did you want to say something else? Uh-huh.
So you mentioned that parents and student work together on this.
Well, the parents don't understand the difference between K to 12.
No, so my question is, under what FERPA protection are they?
Well,
Is it
most of these parents are having their students sign off on FERPA, and our office has an individual release form that the students sign off on. But the parents, I had one parent or guardian who every week would send me a photocopy of their IEP, which listed about 20 different accommodations that I was not providing. And I had multiple conversations. These are not appropriate, and every week I got the same email. Oh, the behavior thing, QBIT. And I know some of you were at the QBIT earlier today. QBIT is the behavioral intervention team, and then there is the Office of Student Conduct, Behavior and Conduct, I think, Nicole Rodriguez. If a student is misbehaving in class, please, please fill out a report. A lot of times the professor will call me because the student was acting up in class. The most I can do is call the student in and say, hey, you know, how's your class going? You need to behave. And they tell me they're perfectly being behaved. I don't witness that behavior. I'm not writing anything up. If they're misbehaving, you should report it. The QBIT is going to collect these reports, and if we have a student who is habitually misbehaving, then we can get them some support. Sometimes they just need to be referred to me because contrary to what we all think, I don't know most of the students with disabilities on this campus. A lot of them never make it to my office unless they're referred by a professor. So the QBIT report could get them the support that they need. Okay, remember that accommodations are legal documents, and while you can certainly question the need for certain accommodations and have a conversation with me, you cannot ignore it. You cannot alter it or change it on your own. And please keep them in a private place. We don't want them floating around. When you receive them, there should be a cover sheet on them so the student's name is not on top. So some basic accommodations. Accommodations for testing, time and a half, 50%. Most of the students, for a regular class, it's about 30 minutes. Most of them use 15 minutes. And if you ask them, most of them will tell you, I just need that extra 10 or 15 minutes. And it makes a huge difference for them. Our testing room is a distraction-limited environment. We never have distraction-free. And just so you don't get sucked into it, we never have an empty room with a student testing. Okay? A lot of students will say, I need a private room. I need to be alone. That's not an acceptable accommodation. Everybody, we don't have cameras, so they're not going to sit in a room by themselves. All tests are proctored. So they will always be proctored. Distraction limited. We seat about 5 students with our proctor at a time. It's in the first floor of the Learning Commons. It's nice and quiet. It's a big size room, so they're not on top of each other. They have the space they need. The students tell me they really like that room. It eliminates a lot of their anxiety because they're not next to each other, feeding off anxiety. And it's a couple of people who have come in have complained it's kind of a boring-looking room. These are staff members, not understanding it's boring-looking on purpose because we're not trying to distract people. There's no pretty things on the wall. It's just a couple tables, and kids come and test. Text reading software is the computer programs, and we have a couple of machines that will actually read things aloud. So a student can take a test. We have a little arm. We call it an arm. It takes a picture of it and instantly starts to read it aloud. In the old days, you used to have to hire people to sit there and read tests. So we have some students who prefer human readers because human readers very often modulate their voices, and students are very good at picking up hints. So we use the machines because it's just easier. The students, once they learn it, realize they can go back and re-listen to something as many times as they need to, which they may not with a human reader. They can speed it up, slow it down, and for those students who have reading decoding difficulties, it really is helpful to them. Computer for written tasks is an accommodations for students that you were discussing before, those who have problems handwriting. Some of our students just can't either physically write, or they just can't write fast enough, or they're just, the connection between their head and handwriting isn't there, but they can type faster. Some of those, so for some of those, they use those, it may say computer for all written tasks, which means laptop for notes, and any in-class assignments. So if you have an in-class essay, an exam, the student can type it. Now, if they're the only ones using a laptop, they could take the test with us so that everyone's not looking. Same thing with a calculator. If you're a math class that does not allow a calculator, the student will test with us so that the rest of the class isn't saying, why does he get a calculator? Spell checker is not as, I mean, you can use spell check on a computer if you're using it, but there is a literal little tiny box that is a spell checker. So students don't have access to the internet. Praxis, GREs, things like that use an actual spell checker for students who have that accommodation. Some of the more tricky accommodations, and I want to spend a little bit more time on these. Flexibility in attendance policy, and that has been misunderstood a little bit. So this year I spent a lot of time actually writing it all out for you, and we're going to go over that in a minute. So we have flexibility in due dates, which is a very common request for students who work, who have families, who have too many classes. Not necessarily disability-related issues. Occasionally, we do have a student with a disability-related need for extra time. You know, we had one student who used, and I don't know what it's called, I'm not a tech person, but you know, they use their eyes to track to type, and that would take longer. So if they were using their specialized computer to write a paper, and the class had a day, it might take them 3 or 4 days, so they would need extra time. So those are the types of things we're looking at when we ask for flexibility, but you're gonna get this request from a lot of students. The other interesting one is alternative to class presentations, and I'm wording this very carefully. We have a lot of students who don't want to stand up in front of a class and speak. I personally don't want to either, but I wasn't given a choice. So I tell the students, in life, we often don't have choices. We need to talk to people. And my favorite is, most of them are education majors. And I keep saying, you have to talk. So they're gonna say, my other school didn't make me do it, or I could do it one-on-one with a professor. So that's where you and I would have to have a conversation. What is the purpose of this oral report? Is it to share information with the class? Is it to show that they've learned presentation skills? You need to learn about the objective of things before we decide. Some professors will say, oh, it's fine, he can just come to my office and do it individually. That's fine if that's what you want. I'm not going to force it on you unless we understand the purpose of it. What I do in our office is we'll have a student do it individually with the mentor, and then we would bring together 2 people or 3 people and have them do it again, and 2 or 3 people, and then I might even bring in, you know, more people, find other students, so they can build up to a class. But this is an accommodation that, you know, if I put it, see it says, please call me, let's discuss it together kind of thing, because it's not as simple as it may sound. Each class is going to be different, so we really need to work together to find out what's fair for the student and for the faculty. Okay, so remember, don't say no, just don't say no. Attendance. A lot of times students will tell me that they're absent, they need excused absences. This could be for a variety of reasons. And in high school, they can be absent unlimited times and still graduate. And so they bring that attitude with them. And I literally had somebody crying this semester when I said to them, that will not happen here, because there is a certain point in every course where you cannot pass if you are out too much. In some classes, it may be 1 absence, may be that point. In other classes, it could be 12. Each class is made up differently, each class is taught differently, and this is where the interactive process has to come in. And so if you have somebody with this accommodation and they've already requested their accommodation, I have emailed this document to you. And I have copies here for people who want to look at it, but we're going to go over it briefly here. Basically, the government there's been so many lawsuits over this that OCR has come out and said, these are the questions that must be answered when determining the appropriateness of an absence accommodation and a limit on the absence accommodation. So, is there interaction between the instructor and the students and between the students? If it's a class where the professor lectures, the students sit and take notes, that's not a lot of interaction. The student can get the notes from someone else. Remember, we're not concerned with student success. We're only looking at the fairness, okay? Does the student's contribution constitute a significant component of the learning process? Yes?
I'm a little bit confused. You mentioned that the goal is to level the playing field. If a faculty member holds most students to a rather stringent attendance policy, and for whatever reason does not hold the student who has certain disabilities to the same policy, in what way does that level the playing field?
Okay. Actually, that's a great question because accommodations are, you have your rule. Accommodations is an exception to a rule. So that answer, I mean, that question is a great question because the answer, that question is not going to be accepted by the court. What they're going to say is, these students have to, let's say you have a 0 attendance policy, okay? You have a 0 attendance policy. However, this student who has this medical condition, we know is going to be in the hospital 1 or 2 nights or 3 nights or whatever. So we have to accommodate them. We have to make an exception to the policy. Now, if you can come back to me and say, look at these questions and answer these questions in a manner that says, oh my goodness, if they miss one class, they are not meeting the standards of this course at all, then we can then say, no, it's not reasonable. But to just say, my attendance policy for everyone is 0, is not meeting the standard, and that's why they gave us specific questions. These questions have gone out nationwide. Every conference I've attended to, every listserv I'm on, every college and university is now using the same questions. So all students with disabilities have to meet the same standards for this. Does the fundamental nature of the course rely on student participation as an essential method? Is it a project-based course? Is it student-led learning? Is it a, this is the bigger question too. I like this, this is how they're wording it. To what degree does a student's failure to attend constitute a significant loss to the educational experience of other students in the class? So, for example, a professor may assign certain chapters to certain students, right? And then they present on it. Well, if I'm absent, I've just denied the rest of the class the knowledge of that chapter. If you're doing group work and you're having conversations about readings and things like that, and I'm absent, I am depriving the knowledge I would normally share to the rest of the class. And that's important. That's the biggest issue. We don't determine if attendance is appropriate based on how it's going to affect the student with the disability, because it sounds terrible, but we're not considering their success. We can excuse these absences, by the way, and I'm not saying give them an A. And I think that's where there's been a lot of confusion. I'm just saying we're not punishing the absences. We're not taking off points for this many absences. However, I'm not saying the student isn't responsible for the material they missed. They are. And I'm not saying they must have an A, because a student who misses 7 or 8 classes is probably has not earned enough to be an A. But the biggest point is their absence affecting others? If their absence affects others, we can deny or limit this accommodation. Okay, that's the big thing. Really, what it's, a lot of you don't have this yet. If I haven't reached out to you yet, it's just I maybe did in the next week. But it's a good idea to think about these questions. It's a good idea for departments to think about these questions. So this way, when I come to you, you have already thought through your process. A lot of times, the teachers will say, "But this is what I do." And that, I can't accept that as an answer. All right, and what does the course description, how does your syllabus and attendance policy, how is it listed? How do you calculate the final grade? And what are the classroom practices and policies regarding attendance? Okay, we said that. Now, also think about, is it a once-a-week class, a twice-a-week class, or a 3 times a week class? Because 6 absences when your class meets three times a week may be very reasonable. If you meet once a week, that's not reasonable. Okay, so we need to think about that. Think about, are they missing information they won't get if they're not there? Are they group work? Okay. Students are told, you may be, I understand you're ill. And see, this is where the sympathy comes in, and it's very hard. They're very ill, some of these students, okay? And they really are absent because they're sick. They're not abusing this. But still, they're not there. They're not doing the work. They're not getting the knowledge. So they may not pass. And they don't understand, because in high school, they can be absent 90 days and still pass. And so it's very tricky. But that's why I just stick to the questions. You know, this is the policy. This is what we're looking at. Okay, so this is the new form that you will get. It will, the questions to think about. It says, flexibility in attendance is reasonable for the above-named course, provided the student adheres to the following, and this is where our conversation leads. Maximum number of disability-related absences allowed for this course. Okay, so if you allow 3 absences for everybody, depending on the style of the course, 4 or 5 might be reasonable. Okay, so we would write that number in. When the student hits that number, let's say the student has 4 absences, when they're absent, they're supposed to notify you and me so we can keep track. I call them back in, I say, look, we need to talk. You're at 4 absences now, so chances of you passing this course are very slim. What are we going to do? It may be, oh, I've had this operation, I'm going to not be absent the rest of the semester. Okay, let's try to finish it. It may be they have to drop the course. It may be that I have to renegotiate with the professor. And yesterday when I was speaking with the professor, he said a very, very wise thing, and I thought that's a good point. At that point in the semester, you'll know what kind of student you're having. Is it a student who's caught up on all her work, who's turning everything in, who has good knowledge, or is it a student who seems to be abusing this and is missing classes right and left without making an attempt to turn work in, without making an attempt to follow up with the professor? And if it's a student that you know is capable of doing all that work, maybe another absence would be reasonable at that time, okay? So we negotiate at that point. The students told if they're absent, preferably in advance, but depending on the nature of the disability, as soon as possible. They're to email the professor and they're to email me. Now, some professors have rules that say I need a doctor's note. However, my accommodation letter covers that. Okay, they don't need to give you a doctor's note because I have the documentation. When they're hospitalized, it gets sent to me. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that, and that's what this agreement is telling you. They're absent. They email you, they email me in advance. They are responsible for getting notes on their own from their friends or classmates. Okay, now, we're telling the students, if the paper's due Thursday and you get sick on Thursday, you need to email the paper to the professor so that it's turned in. If it's a case of the student was sick Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and the paper's not completed by Thursday, then I talk to the professor, well, how many extra days are we going to allow them to finish it? And the answers I've received so far are between 3 and 7, okay, depending, I guess, on how often they meet. And then if a student should miss a test or a quiz, when do you want them to make it up by? A week, 3 days, 2 days? And where do you want them to take it? Do you want me to proctor the makeup? Because we will do that. Do you want them to come to your office hour and take it? This is the so we're not having a major scary discussion. These are the things that I'm asking you to think about so we can decide. What happens is the professor fills this out and signs it. When the students come to pick up their letter, I'm sitting them down with them and we're reviewing it. This way, in May, I won't be getting frantic phone calls from professors who say, I have a student who missed 12 or 13 classes and is filing a complaint because I didn't give her an A. All right, we're going to make this very clear.
Donna, Mark Sapara from the Library Learning Commons. What are the implications, if not connections, of this sort of disability accommodation to academic advising? So that an advisor who would know this maybe isn't putting a student in 5 seminar courses or having a better discussion about the types of classes a student should enroll in so that each class doesn't become problematic like this for them.
It's up to the student to identify to their advisor. So I don't know how many advisors are aware. And I can't tell the advisors. I do tell the students too, because we have some students who get ill or they get tired and they need to rest. Well, don't take class by class by class by class. Give yourself a chance to rest. Give yourself a break. Don't take 3-hour classes back to back and then have to miss 2 or 3 classes in one day if you get ill. All right, the other one, this one's a little trickier. Flexibility in due dates or extensions. And this one, I believe professors are probably asked for by most students, not just students with disabilities, but I'm only concerned with my cohort. So, students who have sudden, mostly medical, but some disability flare, okay? And I use the term flare, which is a medical term, for any disability because I don't need to differentiate between medical or mental health. It's just a flare of a disability. And they can't get their paper done. They're working on it. It's just not going to get done in time. So they're going to request additional time. The professor might say, okay, it's due on Thursday, you give it to me Monday. That's how this accommodation was supposed to always work. What I've discovered, and last semester it seemed to hit, I guess as our numbers grow, I just see more and more cases. But what I'm seeing now is students who are turning in all their papers, like we have a lot of incompletes this semester for students with this accommodation. This accommodation is not to give them incompletes. I'm not asking you to give them unlimited time to do an assignment the rest of the class had a week to do. You know, depending on the disability, really get ill. It is not every assignment. The difficulty is students with disabilities have jobs. Some of them have families. They're taking 5 or 6 classes. Some of them are doing an internship. And in their mind, this covers everything. It doesn't, but this is what they're using it for. So unless I hear back from a faculty, I don't know what they're doing. You know, I may think that they're following the procedure, the proper procedures. Faculty members are saying, oh, they get flexibility in due dates, not realizing, let's talk about it if you have a question. And students are basically being told they can just turn it in whenever. And I get that a lot from, and I get it, you're being kind, but we're really not helping our students because these are students who can't get things done on time, right? So now I've got a student with 5 incompletes who's taking 5 new classes. There's no way he's going to get 10 classwork stuff done. So we don't really help them by allowing this continual thing. And if it's an anxiety issue, the anxiety is really not lessened by saying, okay, you can turn it in next week, because the anxiety now is just stretching out longer. Okay, so these are things we want to talk about. It also depends on the assignment. If you give the assignment today, what's today, Saturday, Thursday, and it's due the next day or due in 2 days, the student may need a couple more days because it's just too fast. If these are assignments they've known about since September and they've been working, they're supposed to be working on for weeks, they should not come to you the day before it's due and say it's not done. I would certainly say to them, show me what you've got done. Let's see how far you've got. Because I think a lot of students are just thinking of open-ended, and I'm hoping that our conversation this semester will reinforce the fact that these dates are for everybody as much as possible. Did you have a question?
Maybe at midterm time, we could get some kind of email to remind us to communicate with you at like.
Well, this is the problem. You know, I'm not tech savvy, and for me to email, I have 550 kids who each have 4 to 5 professors. It's a lot of emails I would have to send out. I don't do blasts, so it's tricky. And the other thing is, I think about it. I do that for the high school. We have high school kids who are in college. You know, that special flex program. I follow up with those professors because these kids need to graduate high school, so it's a little more important. But I question if I should be checking up on them because students have equal rights to fail. They have the same right as everyone else to cut class, to not do their work, and to fail. So for me, being their mother and checking up really isn't following my own rule of equal access. Okay, so this is the form that you will see. Flexibility in assignments, due dates is reasonable for the above named course, provided the student adheres to the following. They are expected to email the professor and ODS. By the way, I say ODS all the time, and I apologize. Office of Disability Services. Request an extension for an assignment at least 24 hours before the due date. So when the paper's due, they shouldn't be saying, oh, I'll give it to you Monday. It needs to be discussed in advance. And at that time, the professor should say, okay, in a reply all email, okay, it's due on Friday, turn it in on Monday. Now I know, now they know. Now, should the student not turn it in on Monday, then whatever your policy is on late assignments is followed using that new due date. You'll have to yell. I see it as two things. It depends on what the question is, all right? If a student is emailing, we use the rule of 3 in our office, so if a student emails at the same time 3 times in a row, they need to stop after that, okay? Because now you're bordering on harassment. And I've also, because they do email me, I've had students who've emailed 20, 30 times in a day. They need to understand that we don't need to jump on them with their request because we have other students. So that if that's a constant issue, you can say to the student, you can no longer email me more than 3 times. And you can let me know. Sometimes they do come to me and say, I've been trying to get in touch with Professor Smith for, 3 weeks because I need to make up this test. But the professor isn't reading his emails. And sometimes we have problems with professors who don't use the Kean email, and I only use the Kean email. So they may not be getting them as timely as we think. But we do try to give give students boundaries as far as this constant email back and forth. If I call, sometimes I have a student taking a test in our office, and we don't have the test. So I will call. If they're full-time faculty, we call their office, or we show up at their classroom. Sometimes, if they're an adjunct, they don't have an office. And if they don't respond to us, we call the secretary of the department who has their personal cell phone number, and she will get in touch with the professors for us. So if it's something that we need, information we need right away, I tell the students if they're asking you a question work-related, school-related, they should go to tutoring. We have a big tutoring center, not to rely on professors tutoring via email. It's different. We have a lot of students on the spectrum. They don't understand social cues. They need really hard boundaries because they don't understand it's wrong. I had one student, wonderful, wonderful kid, but he wrote his emails in the memo line. So you never had to open anything. He would write 20 or 30 in the memo line. So I just pull up my email and I could read his whole message without clicking on a thing. And professors were quite intimidated after a while because this is how and we had multiple conversations of me saying, this is wrong, stop it. You can't keep doing this. He'll learn, but they just need to be told point blank sometimes that this is inappropriate. Okay. Different accommodations. Sometimes a classroom will need to be moved. Sometimes you'll know why, and sometimes you won't. I apologize, I'm not being secretive on purpose, but depending on the student's disability, some are more open than others. So if you were assigned to CAS building, I'm going to apologize because that's the most inaccessible building for some of our students. So this is one of the most accessible buildings. So if you get moved from CAS to this building, or to Hutchinson, it's because of accessibility. You can't park right outside CAS. And we have some students who cannot walk more than here to there. So they park right in front, they get on that elevator right there, and they're in their room. So we need to move them for a reason. And I apologize if it's inconvenient for the professors and the other students, but this is one of the accommodations we do have to make, okay? If it's a lab class, usually the registrar's office knows it. I don't move them, registrar moves them. But if it's a specialized classroom, you need to tell me as soon as possible so we can figure something out. Most of you have probably seen our tables. There are tables, some have chairs, some don't, for students, mostly with mobility disabilities. Students in the wheelchairs are supposed to be able to get right to their table. There's a big sign on it that says, don't move the tables, because for years we lose, these are very expensive ADA tables, and they disappear. People take them out for bake sales, and people use them for other things, or the professor doesn't like it and puts it in the hallway and it disappears. They need to be there. The student may not be in your class, but the student uses this classroom. So please, if you see it, it needs to be there. It's also good for, if there's chairs, it's also good for other people, like a pregnant woman who may not fit well in a desk. Well, if there's a table and chair, she can just sit in that, as long as the student isn't in the same class as she is. So it's there for a reason. Please don't move it. We give early registration to our students as a courtesy, more because it takes me a while to get the letters done, but also so some of our students need to make sure there's breaks in between their classes, make sure that they don't have too many in one day, things like that. When a student doesn't take advantage of it, they sometimes end up with a very bad schedule of back to back to back and things like that. But they do get early registration, and we encourage them to use it. So if you are an advisor and our student is frantically trying to get in touch with you a little early, it's because they're told, if you don't meet with your advisor, you can't use early registration day. Certain computers will have special software or equipment posted in the labs. Certain computer labs have adaptive equipment on one of the computers, usually the first one in the door. Special enlargers, so students who are visually impaired will be able to use it. One or two have a JAWS on it. JAWS is the program that reads things aloud. It's for students who are blind. Excuse me. You'll also, that picture of that up there is our eBot. The eBot is a really cool piece of equipment that was donated to us by a local charity. It is for students with visual impairments. The arm comes up and you can point it to the blackboard or the whiteboard. And the students who have never been able to see the board before are now able to view it on their iPad in front of their face. So we have had students who are passing math for the first time in their life because they can actually see what the teacher's doing on the board. It's a fabulous piece of equipment. If the student is in your room using it, my student workers will show up before class, we'll set it up, there will be a table in the front, we set the eBot up, and when class is over, my student worker will be there to take it down again. And that's it, nothing for the professors to do, the students trained in its use. You'll just have my little worker, and my workers all have shirts that identify themselves. They'll come in, they'll come out. We're probably going to start using it, some of the students have asked for like chemistry or something like that. We only have the one, so it's kind of whoever schedules first. Okay, remember, legally, everything you use in your classroom needs to be accessible. Realistically, if you don't have a student with a disability in your classroom, you don't think about it. But any video you use in your class should be captioned, closed caption, okay? If you use a lot of movies and stuff like that, you need to think about visually impaired students. If it's a TED Talk where someone's just standing speaking, they'll get the knowledge. If it's a film with a lot of dark background knowledge, I mean, working, you know, little movement and not a lot of talking, then you need to figure out either don't get it, don't use that movie, or there is a way to caption movies for the blind. It's descriptive captioning. It's, I mean, I have companies that are sending me things about it, but you need to think about this in advance. Our bigger is some of the lynda.com, some of you may be using that website. I know we all have access to it. Has a lot of different videos that are posted that are captioned. YouTube has more and more captioned videos. It's just a matter of finding newer ones. Yes?
If we felt that a particular film was, so critical to that course, would it be appropriate to allow the student to do an alternative assignment?
This is where it gets tricky. Technically, what you should do is get the film captioned. There are companies that do that. We haven't had that conversation yet at this university about who's going to pay for it and who's going to deal with it, but you can get things captioned. I don't know. See, this is where we have to kind of chat with the kids. Technically, no, you're not supposed to. Sometimes we do. Sometimes the student is okay. And sometimes if it's depending on the student, sometimes if you send them the link to the video, if they have vision, but they just can't see very far, some of them will come to my office and put their screen right to their eyes, and they'll be able to see some stuff. So it may be that if you email it to them, they're able to see enough of it that they can use it. Last year we had a student who had to view a commercial, and we were able to find the same commercial, but it was descriptive captioned for her. So she was able to, and she watched it with us, so we were able to kind of describe what was going on in it, so to give her the visual of it. And she was using the captioning for it. Yes?
Yeah, follow up on this point. So if you find this out just before the semester starts, you could be quite a quandary. It's very difficult to find alternative material.
Which is why, legally, every material we use in our class is supposed to be accessible to all, because we could have I just had a new student sign up last week who's blind. When the students that are here, anybody who's teaching a student who is blind or visually impaired was notified for our returning students. It was November 14th. I sent the first email out saying, this is what's happening, these students are registered, start thinking about how you do it. I then followed up around finals week with the accommodation letter. And again, remember, and the biggest issue is we're not using as many textbooks as we used to. We use a lot of handouts. People are posting things. And this is a PDF. Now, normally I would say you could email a PDF or a Word document to a student, and the text readers would read it to them, okay? No problem. Except these are the kind of PDFs, now this is a book we had in our office, but these are the kind of PDFs we're getting. When you make a copy of a copy of a copy, I don't know if there's any computer science people in here, it degrades the pixels and the computer program can't read it, something like that. This, all the black spots, the handwritten stuff, the computer will try to read it and freeze. And the students will keep saying, there's nothing here. And I'm looking, saying, there's something there, but they can't read it. So if you're going to, I always ask you to email things directly to the student. It needs to be a clean PDF. We prefer Word documents because it's easier for them to manipulate, but a clean PDF would also work. But it can't have the lines around it, it can't have writing, it can't have drawing. And a lot of teachers are just using the same kind of articles, you know, good articles that you've used from year to year, but you need to find the original for the students who use screen readers, and that makes it a little trickier. The only way to convert this page is to type it out. You can't convert something this destroyed. Some articles we can put through a system and convert from a PDF to a Word document or the other way around, not a problem. Clean documents we can handle, but these kind, they just don't work. All right, a couple service dogs on campus, so just as a reminder, you should not bother them. Don't even look at the dogs. They're cute, but I find it better just not to look at them. Don't talk to them, and don't let students talk to them or play with them either. If you have as far as I know, there are 2 registered students with service dogs. There may be others who are bringing their dogs and saying they're service dogs. A service dog should walk into your classroom, climb under the desk, and go to sleep and not move. They're almost as if they're invisible. All right? If you have a dog who's causing commotion, then you should follow whatever. We have a no pet policy on this campus. Dogs are not allowed through state law. So you should report that through your department or whatever, I guess through your dean. But these dogs, we just want to leave them alone. We had a problem, and I applaud you all because you all stopped, you all ignored the service dog, and he did not break, and he's doing a great job. I saw him just recently, 2 weeks ago. They do mobility training, so they were back on campus learning their new classrooms, and the lab is a full-grown lab now. He's a big boy, but the other one is younger, more of a puppy. The Rottweiler died, and so she has a younger service dog now. If you are afraid of dogs, you, I'm sorry to say, are not as important as a service dog. So the service dog stays. So the people with dogs in their class already know about it. All right, it's on the accommodation form. When I send the first email about the student with the guide dog, I say you will have a blind student with the dog in your class. That's your time to come to someone and say, I'm very allergic, I can't have a dog in my class, so that we can make changes. Once that dog steps into your classroom, the dog has the legal power. Other students may be afraid or allergic. My first suggestion is have them sit on separate sides of the room. If that doesn't work, then we need to move the other student out, okay? The dog, service dogs, has priority in the classrooms. Real service dogs. Okay, we talked about my testing room a little bit. So the testing room is really there to help you because you may not be able to provide all of the accommodations. So you can send them to our office. They can take their tests. They are always proctored. We send the tests back that day via email unless we have a different instruction from you, so you can grade them the same time as everyone else. Gone are the days of everyone getting their test except the student with disability who's a week or two behind. It's all the same. This is important. They need to take the test the same day as your class, okay? Unless you allow everyone else to pick a date. Now, this is the exception, and I always have exceptions. We close at 5. So if you have a night class or a Saturday class, we're not open. Our office is not open. So what I tell the students of the night class is, if you have a 4:30 or a 7:30 class, you need to take your test during the day. You need to take it at 2 o'clock. So they come in at 2, they take their test, then they go to class, or whatever the professor tells them to do. You will have their test that day. If the schedule doesn't work, then it might have to be the next morning. But it's either the afternoon before the class or the morning before the class for those who can't take it in with you, with the professor. All right, we're not doing 3 weeks down the line, we're not doing next Monday. We need to do this. We need to take control back. These are your tests, this is your test day, this is what we're doing. Otherwise, we have students who keep delaying and delaying and delaying, and then we have 3 or 4 tests in our office, we don't know which test they're actually gonna take. If a student doesn't show for their appointment, you will get an email from one of our proctors saying, you know, Johnny had his test appointment today at 3 o'clock and he didn't show. We assume he's coming to your class to take it. Okay? I don't write accommodation. Let's put it this way. I have not yet written an accommodation that excuses people from taking tests. We do scribe for them if we need to. And if you have a student who has a temporary, what we call temporary disability, basically an injury. Last year, some poor girl broke both wrists. So her nice teacher sent her to us. We hooked her up with note takers. I did her exams for her. And then once she could move her fingers enough to type, she left us and she went on her own. But we are always around to help in that manner too. Okay, and this I already told you. This is a form you'll get from the student. We tell them a week in advance. We need time so you can get us the tests. If you're from Kean-Ocean, we are using the Ocean Testing Center. Okay, so their rules are different. Whereas I would like the tests emailed to me, they won't accept email tests. It has to be paper. So if you have a student in Kean-Ocean who's going to use their testing center, you can always email me and I will email you their policy if the student doesn't have it. Basically, you have to email it to them. They have a form you have to fill out and the student can make an appointment and identify as a Kean student. Okay, but when you email a test to them, they call me and yell at me. One last thing, I know you're all eager for lunch. Over-accommodating. Over-accommodating is providing students with accommodations that are not on the accommodation sheet. Over-accommodating is giving students accommodations who just walk in and ask for them. They're not registered with you. There's really no need for this. I always say you're very nice and you're very helpful to students. And a lot of times you look at a student and you know the student, you think the student has a disability by their behavior, by their performance. So it makes sense, oh, they need accommodations, but no. At this university, they have to come to me first, okay? So send them to me, walk them to me. We've had a couple students that it took them a while, they finally found their way to me. There are problems with over-accommodating. Behavior is another one. There are students who are very inappropriate in class. But if you don't write either a QBIT or a behavioral conduct form, nothing will be done about it because we need this stuff in writing. What's happening is students are misbehaving in 4 or 5 different classes, but nobody's telling anyone. So nothing's being done about it. And misbehavior tends to escalate. Okay, so I'm trying to, if you have a student on a spectrum who is very, very misbehaving in your class, call me and I will call them in and we will be real specific in what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And that student will become a better student. We work with students, our mentors work with these students each week on appropriate classroom behavior, but if I don't hear that they're not being appropriate, it limits what we can do with them. Why am I pushing over accommodating? Because you don't want to get sued. Okay, you don't want a complaint filed against you. You don't want to have to go testify with Charlie Williams. If you give students accommodations that are not on their accommodation letter, you are not being fair to the rest of the class. So another student can now come and say, well, Johnny over there is getting extra time or this or that, and I'm not. And now this professor is no longer treating students the same. So we want to be careful with that. The other issue is students will get away with stuff and then they'll meet that one teacher who knows the rules, who sat here through the whole thing and knows what to do. And then they're going to start reporting that teacher. And it just runs into a vicious cycle. If we all follow the same rules, none of us will really run into these issues. All right, remember too that at some point before graduation, they will have to give a public speech. And at some point before graduation, they will have to take a test in class, and they will have to write a paper on time. So we're not really helping them when we start, especially with the freshmen, when we don't start teaching them the standards. Remember, all students should meet university standards. Okay, so please don't do it. If a student says to you, oh, Mrs. Dingle said I can't take the test today. I have to take it next week. I doubt that I said it, so I would call. If the student comes to you and says, oh, Mrs. Dingle said I don't ever have to give a presentation in class, call. Students are tricky. And some of our students are not malicious. They truly believe that because they're nervous, that they have a right not to get up in front and give a speech or take a test. And in their anxiety, they just feed on themselves. They're not maliciously lying to us and trying to get around things. They believe this is what they need. When a student is so anxious about giving a speech, I walk them over to counseling. Let's give them a couple sessions with a counselor. Let's work on them on, working a little bit at a time to get, and by the end of the semester, they should be giving speeches. So be careful. A lot of students are going to tell you a lot of things, and my favorite is when they use my name, and then I get calls from professors saying, why did you do this? And I didn't do it. So I am asking, please call. I have an open door policy for our students. It includes faculty and staff. And a 2-second phone call can stop a lot of confusions. And sometimes it's just a teacher thinks I'm asking too much of them. And when we have that conversation, then we leave happier, and because we're all on the same page again. All right? Please don't say no. If I call you and say a student is requesting this, don't say absolutely not. Let's call me and have a conversation. And one more thing. If you're really adamant about something, you probably should pick up the phone and call me. Putting things in writing, such as, I don't think I can teach a class that has a blind student in, is probably not smart, okay? I know that people are reacting in the moment, like, oh my God, how am I gonna do this? What am I gonna do? This is ridiculous, you're asking too much. But pick up the phone and call me. Let's have that conversation before we start putting these things in writing, because I know that in the moment, this is just a quick thought, but once it's in writing, if this student files a complaint, every email we have is subpoenaed and submit, and everyone's going to read it, and no one will be in the moment with you. So think twice before you write. Pick up the phone and call if you have a question. And to be honest, 550 kids, and what do we have? Maybe like 7 problems with students. We don't have a lot of big problems. Most of our students are aware, and I just looked at their grades. I have a lot of students in my office who are doing really, really well. They work hard, they do well. All right, so please call if you have a problem, if you have a question. Otherwise, good luck and have a great semester.